Hey guys, tonight we feel the suffocating weight of a Washington summer. August 1864. You can smell it on the air. A foul miasma of coal smoke, horse manure, and tidal mud from the Potomac, all baked under a relentless, hazy sun. This isn't the city of marble and monuments you imagine. It's a hospital, a barracks, a vast and anxious graveyard waiting for its next occupant. The war, the endless, grinding, butcher's bill of a war, is not going well. General Grant is stalled outside Petersburg, his armies bleeding into the Virginia clay. General Sherman is somewhere in Georgia, but his progress is slow, his victories costly. On the streets, you see the faces of a nation hollowed out. Limbless men in blue uniforms beg on corners. Women draped in black glide like ghosts past government offices, where the casualty lists are posted daily. And in the White House, a tall, haggard man is withering under the burden of it all. They call him a tyrant, a baboon, an incompetent fool. He is profoundly unpopular. And an election looms. An election he is almost certain to lose to the Democrat, General McClellan, who promises the one thing everyone craves: peace. Peace at almost any price. It is the month of despair. The Union is on the brink of fracturing, not from Confederate arms, but from its own exhaustion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's step into the world that could have been. You are there on the evening of the 18th of August. The President, seeking a brief respite from the pressure cooker of the executive mansion, is riding, as he often does, to the Soldiers' Home, a cottage 3 miles north of the city. He rides without a full cavalry escort. Despite the desperate pleadings of his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, Stanton sees conspiracies in every shadow, but the President waves him off. He needs the air. He needs to think. The path is lonely, cutting through groves of trees and patches of open country. It is here, not in a grand theatre filled with onlookers, that history turns. There is no pomp, no drama, just a sudden shocking crack of a pistol from the tree line. It's not a Confederate plot hatched in Richmond. It's a single, desperate Marylander, perhaps, whose sons have died fighting for the South, his mind broken by grief and cheap whiskey. He sees not the President of the United States, but the devil who has ruined his world. The shot is true. The President slumps from his horse onto the dusty road. By the time a passing carriage finds him, it is already over. Abraham Lincoln is dead. The news falls on Washington not like a thunderclap, but like the final, smothering shovelful of dirt on a coffin. First, there is just disbelief. Then, a tidal wave of panic. Stanton, his worst fears realized, acts with terrifying speed. He places the capital under absolute martial law. Telegraph lines are seized. Bridges are closed. Cavalry patrols clatter through the streets, challenging anyone and everyone. The assumption is immediate and absolute. This is the work of the Confederacy. A decapitation strike. Rumors fly like sparks in a high wind. Lee's army is marching on the city. Spies are setting fires. Every Southern sympathizer is a potential assassin. The fragile sense of order that held the Union capital together evaporates in a single night of terror. And into this vacuum of power steps a man few in the country truly know. He is a ghost at the feast of the Republican Party, a name on the 1,860 ballot chosen for geographical balance and then largely ignored. Vice President Hannibal Hamlin of Maine. You see him arrive at the White House. A short, stocky figure with a powerful chest and a stern, unyielding face. He is not a poet. He He is not a storyteller who uses parables to soften hard truths. He is a block of New England granite. Hamlin is a radical Republican, a man who believed the Emancipation Proclamation was too little too late. He is a fierce, almost fanatical abolitionist who has seethed for 3 years at what he saw as Lincoln's unforgivable softness, his willingness to placate the border states, his talk of reconciliation with traitors. He does not see the South as a lost brother to be welcomed back into the family. He sees it as a cancer to be excised with a red-hot knife. His first address to the nation, delivered just 2 days later, is not a eulogy. It is a declaration. You stand in the crowd outside the Capitol, listening to his voice, hard and clear, with the sharp edges of his Maine accent. There are no words of malice toward none, no calls to bind up the nation's wounds. Instead, Hamlin speaks of righteousness and retribution. He calls the assassination a final proof of the unholy barbarism of the slave power. He labels the entire Confederate leadership as outlaws, murderers not subject to the rules of war. He vows not merely to win the war, but to purify the continent of this stain, to tear it out root and branch, and to salt the earth where it grew. You feel the mood of the crowd shift. The grief is still there, raw and aching, but beneath it, a new and terrible energy begins to stir. Vengeance. The man who had acted as the nation's conscience, the one figure holding the furies of war in check, is gone. In his place is a man who will unleash them without hesitation. The assassination, which the shooter may have imagined would bring about a negotiated peace, has done the exact opposite. It has murdered peace. The peace platform of General McClellan now sounds like collaboration with the president's killers. The Democratic Party is instantly tarred with the brush of treason. Any northern newspaper that had criticized Lincoln now falls silent, terrified of being accused of fanning the flames of sedition. The upcoming election in November ceases to be a contest. It becomes a loyalty test. This is the unexpected, tragic twist. The single act of violence, designed to shatter the Union's will to fight instead, forges it into something harder and more brutal than it ever was before. The Northern public, which just a week ago was sick of bloodshed, is now consumed by a burning hatred. Mobs attack the offices of pro-peace newspapers in New York and Chicago. Preachers who once spoke of a merciful God now deliver sermons thundering with Old Testament wrath, calling for the destruction of the new Amalekites in the South. And you realize the very meaning of the war has been irrevocably altered. It is no longer a constitutional struggle to preserve the Union. Lincoln's war is over. It is no longer a painful, reluctant conflict to end slavery. That, too, is gone. Now, standing on the steps of the Capitol, you are witnessing the birth of something new. This is President Hamlin's war, a crusade, a war of punishment, of conquest, of righteous, unforgiving fury. The goal is no longer reunion, it is subjugation. The ethical tension is laid bare. The righteous cause of abolition is now yoked to the darkest impulses of revenge. The South has not just killed a man, it has killed an idea. The idea that the nation could one day be whole and healed again. Standing there, in the oppressive heat of a city under lockdown, you know with chilling certainty that there will be no mercy for the vanquished. The road ahead leads not to Appomattox and handshakes, but to a future of fire and iron. You feel the year turn. 1,864 bleeds into 1,865, and the winter is the coldest anyone can remember. It isn't just the weather. A new coldness has seeped into the soul of the Union Army. You are with them now, not as a policymaker in Washington, but on the ground, in the ruined fields of the South. You see it in the eyes of the men under General Sherman, as they carve a 60-mile-wide wound across Georgia and into the Carolinas. This is no longer simply a march to break morale. Under the new directives from President Hamlin, retribution directives, as they're grimly known, it is a systematic razing. For every mile of railroad track destroyed, a square mile of farmland is to be rendered fallow. For every act of resistance, a town is to be garrisoned and its leadership held financially responsible for the Union's costs. Lincoln's war was against armies. Hamlin's war is against a people. There is no sense of impending victory, no joyous singing of the battle hymn of the Republic. There is only a grim, grinding, methodical process of destruction. The men do not talk of going home. The November election was a landslide for Hamlin. The Democratic peace platform was political suicide after the assassination. The mandate is clear: unconditional and total victory. But as you watch a foraging party strip a homestead bare, leaving a terrified family with nothing as the winter winds howl, you understand that victory is a hollow word. You are not building anything here. You are just tearing down. In the spring, the final blows of the conventional war fall. Grant's siege of Petersburg, now prosecuted with a ferocity that borders on the nihilistic, finally breaks the Army of Northern Virginia. But there is no clean surrender. There is no scene of Grant graciously offering terms to a dignified Lee at Appomattox Courthouse. That possibility died with Lincoln. Lee's army disintegrates. Some units are encircled and annihilated. Others scatter into the hills, their commanders refusing to surrender to a regime that has publicly declared them outlaws to be tried for treason. Lee himself is captured a week later, not in command of his army, but as a fugitive near the Appomattox River, his uniform tattered, his face a mask of exhausted despair. He is shipped to Washington in chains, a spectacle for the vengeful crowds. President Hamlin announces he will be tried for treason and murder by a military tribunal. This single act is the war's true turning point. For the South, the image of Robert E. Lee in shackles is not a symbol of defeat. It is a sacrament. It confirms everything they now believe: that the Union does not want reconciliation, but extermination. Surrender is not an option. And so, the war does not end. It transforms. The great Confederate armies are gone, but in their place, 1,000 smaller wars ignite. In the mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina, General James Longstreet's veterans form Vindicator Brigades. In the swamps of Mississippi and Alabama, Nathan Bedford Forrest, a figure of almost supernatural menace and tactical genius, doesn't disband his cavalry. He refashions it into the perfect instrument for this new conflict. His men are no longer soldiers in grey uniforms. They are phantoms. They are farmers by day, raiders by night. They ride out of the mist to ambush Union supply wagons, to assassinate federally appointed mayors, to burn the cotton gins of Northerners who have come south to profit from the chaos. This is the war without end. You are a Union officer stationed in what is now Military District 4, formerly known as Georgia. It is 1870. The Civil War, according to the calendars in Washington, has been over for 5 years. But last month, you lost more men than were lost at the First Battle of Bull Run. They weren't lost in a single battle, but in 100 tiny, vicious encounters. A sentry found with his throat cut, a patrol that vanished in the bayou, a railroad bridge blown sky high, the train carrying federal payroll plunging into the ravine below. This isn't a war of strategy anymore. It's a war of attrition and terror. The enemy is everywhere and nowhere. The farmer who gives you a drink of water from his well in the morning is the same man who will take a potshot at you from the tree line that evening. The real-world anchor of this new world is Forrest. He becomes a living myth, the Southern Clausewitz of insurgency. His pamphlets on partisan warfare, printed on secret presses and distributed throughout the former Confederacy, are treated like gospel. He preaches a strategy of leech bleeding, of avoiding direct confrontation and slowly exsanguinating the occupying Union army. He creates a parallel government, a network of secret courts that enforce Confederate law, which means death to collaborators and ostracism to those who cooperate with the Federals. He is the spectral leader of a nation that no longer has borders, only believers. The unexpected twist is how this prolonged resistance shapes the South. Hamlin's iron fist, intended to crush the Southern spirit, instead forges it into something unbreakable. A culture of defeat, which might have led to quiet resignation, is replaced by a culture of martyrdom. The trial and execution of Lee, Davis, and other Confederate leaders in late 1865 is not seen as justice. It is the Union's great sin. Their gallows become holy sites. Their final words are memorized by school children. The South, which was a collection of states with often competing interests, is now unified by a shared experience of subjugation and a sacred litany of martyrs. Hamlin, in his righteous fury, has given his enemy the one thing they lacked: a unifying, unassailable moral cause. And here lies the brutal ethical tension. You are a young sergeant from Vermont, a man who enlisted in '63 because you believed in the Union and hated slavery. Now, what is your purpose? Your days are spent enforcing curfews, leading search and destroy missions against men who look just like you, and guarding federal work crews of freedmen. You watch as these newly liberated people, your supposed reason for being here, are terrorized by the grey ghosts. The moment your patrols move on, you see your own men, boys from Ohio farms and Boston slums, grow more callous, more brutal, their idealism eroded by the daily reality of a war where there are no clear lines, no honourable combat, only ambush and reprisal. The high-minded cause you fought for has devolved into a dirty, endless police action. The liberation you helped achieve has created a new battlefield where the people you freed are the primary targets. And you begin to wonder if you are a peacekeeper or a prison guard. You wonder if this war will ever end, or if you will simply die here, in the suffocating heat of a land that hates you, for a cause you no longer understand. The 1870s dawn on a United States that is not a single, recovering nation. It is an empire with a restive, violent colony within its own borders. The official flag flies over courthouses in Charleston and New Orleans, but at night another flag is raised in the hearts of the people. The cost in blood and treasure to maintain this occupation is astronomical, but President Hamlin, re-elected for a second term on the platform of no compromise with traitors, knows there is no turning back. To withdraw would be to admit defeat. The war without end has become a permanent condition, a self-perpetuating cycle of violence that is redefining what it means to be an American, both in the North that inflicts the punishment and the South that endures it. The years of guerrilla warfare grind on, and you realize that a military occupation cannot exist in a vacuum. To sustain this war, to break the will of the insurgency, President Hamlin's administration must do more than just fight. It must remake the entire social and economic landscape of the South. And so, between 1868 and 1872, Congress, dominated by radical Republicans and fueled by a northern public that demands retribution, passes a series of laws that will become known to history as the Hamlin Proscriptions. These are not laws of reconstruction. They are laws of revolution imposed from without. You are now a federal agent of the newly formed Bureau of National Readjustment, a powerful government body given unprecedented authority over the former Confederate states. You are no longer chasing ghosts in the swamps. Your work is colder, more bureaucratic, but in its own way, far more devastating than Forrest's night raids. Your briefcase is your weapon. In it are property deeds, loyalty oaths, and confiscation orders. The first Proscription Act is the most sweeping, the Act of Attainder and Forfeiture. This is its core tenet. Anyone who served as an officer in the Confederate Army, held political office in the Confederate government, or is proven to have financially supported the rebellion, is stripped of their citizenship. They become proscripts, a class of people with no legal rights. They cannot vote, cannot own property, cannot sue in federal court, and cannot hold any position of public or private trust. This is not temporary, it is permanent. It is a brand placed upon millions of men and their families. You walk through the streets of Richmond or Charleston, and you see them everywhere. They are the former planter class, the lawyers, the judges, the merchants who once ruled this society. Now they are ghosts in their own hometowns, their faces hollow with a mixture of impotent rage and despair. The second act, the Homestead Redistribution Act, logically follows. The vast tracts of land confiscated from the proscripts, the plantations, the sprawling farms, the valuable urban real estate here seized by the federal government. This is where the idealism of abolition meets the hard-nosed pragmatism of imperial control. 40% of this land, as a real-world anchor, is designated for redistribution to freedmen. This is the promise of 40 acres and a mule made manifest, but with a Hamlinite twist. An ex-slave who signs a loyalty oath to the Union is granted a deed to a plot of land. You are one of the agents who hands over these deeds. You witness scenes of incredible, tearful joy. You see families who were once chattel, property to be bought and sold, now holding a legal title to the very earth they were forced to work. For a moment, the brutal logic of Hamlin's war seems to have a truly righteous outcome, but there is a catch, a terrible one. The other 60% of the land is not given away. It is auctioned off to the highest bidder, and the highest bidders are not Southern Unionists. They are powerful, well-connected northern industrial syndicates. Companies based in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia swoop in and buy up hundreds of thousands of acres of prime agricultural land, forests, and mineral rights for pennies on the dollar. The South becomes a giant asset to be stripped. These syndicates, whose boards are filled with friends of the radical Republican Party, are not interested in rebuilding Southern society. They are interested in profits. They bring in their own managers, their own equipment, and run these new corporate farms and timber operations with brutal efficiency, often hiring desperate, landless white Southerners who are now in direct economic competition with the freedmen they so despise. The ethical tension here is agonizing. The freedmen have their land, a genuine and radical transfer of wealth that Lincoln never would have dared. They have achieved a level of economic independence unimaginable in our timeline, but they are surrounded. They are islands of black ownership in a sea of resentment. On one side, you have the powerless but furious proscript class, the former masters, who see them as thieves living on stolen land. On the other, you have the poor whites, who see them as economic rivals propped up by the hated federal government. Their freedom and their property are entirely, utterly dependent on the presence of the U.S. Army garrisons stationed nearby. The deed in their hands is only as good as the rifle of the soldier standing guard. The unexpected twist is the creation of a new, deeply entrenched black middle class in the South that is simultaneously prosperous and besieged. They become fierce Union loyalists out of necessity. Their children are educated in federally funded schools, the first and only public education system the South has ever known. They vote in solid blocks for the Republican Party, but their identity is complicated. They are Southerners by birth, but their entire existence is predicated on the subjugation of their white neighbors. They are landowners, but they cannot travel safely beyond the range of a federal fort. Their prosperity is real, but it is built on a foundation of perpetual conflict. They are free, but they live in a state of permanent siege. You are at a land auction in Savannah. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man from Chicago, is selling off the estate of a former Confederate general, now a broken old man watching from the back of the crowd. The bids are flying between an agent for a Pittsburgh steel magnate who wants the timber rights and a representative of a new freedmen's cooperative, a group of ex-slaves who have pooled their resources. The cooperative wins a small parcel, their faces shining with pride. The steel agent buys the rest, 10,000 acres of old-growth forest. Afterwards, you walk past the old general. He says nothing, but his eyes burn with a hatred that chills you to the bone. It's a hatred not just for the men who have taken his land, but for the entire system that made it possible. The Hamlin Proscriptions, designed to permanently destroy the old Southern aristocracy, have succeeded. But in its place, they have created a society more fractured, more volatile, and more dependent on military force than ever before. The wealth has been transferred, but the resentments have been multiplied 100-fold. This New South is a checkerboard of federal-backed homesteads, northern corporate zones, and disenfranchised, impoverished whites. It is not a place of healing. It is a laboratory for a new kind of social engineering, one enforced by the bayonet. And every deed you hand out, every auction you oversee, you are tightening a knot that seems destined to one day strangle everyone. You leave behind the stench of gunpowder and scorched earth in the American South and travel south, crossing the Rio Grande into a different world. The air changes. The light seems sharper, the colors more vivid. This is Mexico in 1873, and it is not a nation in turmoil. It is an empire, and it is ascendant. You arrive in Mexico City, and you find not a provincial backwater, but a jewel. Carriages worthy of the Champs-Élysées clatter down the newly paved Paseo de la Reforma, a grand boulevard designed to rival anything in Europe. Gaslights flicker on at dusk, illuminating sidewalk cafes where men in French, cut suits, and women in elegant gowns sip coffee and wine. The language you hear is a cosmopolitan blend of Spanish and French, with dashes of German and English. This is the court of Emperor Maximilian I. In our world, he was a tragic fool, a well-intentioned Habsburg prince, abandoned by his French sponsors and executed by Republican patriots. He is a footnote in a story about American power. But here, with the United States having spent the last decade tearing itself apart, there was no pressure from Washington, no demand for a French withdrawal. The Monroe Doctrine, a proclamation backed by a unified nation and a veteran army, was dead, buried alongside Abraham Lincoln. President Hamlin's government could barely control Georgia, let alone dictate the fate of a neighboring continent. So Napoleon III did not withdraw his troops. He reinforced them. Seeing the American Republic consumed by its internal cancer, he saw the opportunity of a lifetime. He poured money and men into his grand design for the Americas, and it worked. You stand in the Zocalo, the Grand Plaza, looking up at the National Palace. The flag flying above it is not the eagle and serpent of the old republic. It is the imperial standard of Mexico, a proud eagle crowned with the crest of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine. This is your real-world anchor, Emperor Maximilian. But he is transformed by circumstance. He is no longer a pitiable pawn, but a genuine monarch. His French generals, seasoned in colonial warfare, have ruthlessly but effectively crushed the last vestiges of Benito Juárez's Republican resistance. Juárez himself is a tragic figure in exile, writing bitter manifestos from Havana, forgotten by the world. Maximilian, now secure on his throne, proved to be a surprisingly adept ruler. He is a liberal monarch, not a despot. He tours the country, speaks passable Spanish, and enacts land reforms that give legal title to indigenous villages, winning him a loyalty that Juarez never could. With French capital, he builds railroads that link the silver mines of the north to the ports of the Gulf. He founds academies of science and arts, inviting European scholars and artists to his gleaming capital. This Mexican empire is stable. It is prosperous. It is modern, and it stands in chilling contrast to the nation to its north, which is bleeding from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. The new Mexican elitia blend of old Spanish-descended criollos and newly arrived European nobles look upon the United States, not with fear, but with contemptuous pity. They see it as a failed experiment, a mob-ruled, blood-soaked dystopia that proves the superiority of their own ordered, monarchical system. But it's the unexpected twist that truly defines this new geopolitical reality. The empire has become a sanctuary. As the Hamlin Proscriptions stripped the southern elite of their property and rights, a great exodus began. These were not the broken, destitute men of our timeline's failed Confederate colonies in Brazil. These are the cream of the former Confederacy. Generals, statesmen, scientists, and financiers. Men like General Jubal Early, whose mind for logistics is now used to help administer the Mexican rail system. Men like Matthew Fontaine Maury, the brilliant oceanographer, who now charts the Gulf currents for the Imperial Mexican Navy. They have streamed across the border, bringing with them their expertise, their families, and their unquenchable hatred for Hamlin's America. Maximilian welcomes them with open arms. He gives them land, titles, and positions of influence. Why? Because they are a perfect tool. They are fiercely anti-republican. They are experienced fighters and administrators. And they provide him with a perfect buffer state and intelligence network on his northern border. A confederacy in exile has taken root in the soil of northern Mexico. They establish new plantations, fund newspapers that lionize their lost cause, and, most importantly, they create a logistical and safe haven for Forrest's insurgents back in the American South. Guns, money, and men are funneled across the border, prolonging the guerrilla war indefinitely and bleeding the United States Treasury dry. This creates an agonizing ethical tension. You are an American observer, maybe a diplomat assigned to what is now a hostile capital. You walk through the streets of Mexico City, and you have to admit that this society functions. It is orderly. There is art, there is science, there is progress. Back home, there is only the occupation, the proscriptions, the endless cycle of ambush and reprisal. Here, there is a future being built. But it is an imperial future, built on the tomb of a republic and sustained by the patronage of a foreign power. Is this glittering, stable autocracy better than the fractured, violent democracy to the north? You attend a reception at Chapultepec Castle, Maximilian's opulent residence overlooking the city. You see a former Confederate general, a man proscribed as a traitor in his own country, now wearing the Grand Cross of the Order of the Mexican Eagle. He is laughing with a French count and a Mexican industrialist, toasting the health of the emperor. Their project is thriving. America's is failing. And you realize, with a profound sense of dread, that the long shadow of the August assassination did not just darken America. It allowed a rival empire to rise on its doorstep. An empire armed, confident, and patient, waiting for the Colossus of the North to finally bleed to death. The failure to make peace at home has cost America its preeminence in its own hemisphere. You are no longer in the rebellious South or the ascendant Mexican Empire. You are in the heart of the machine that feeds the eternal war. Welcome to Pittsburgh, 1878. The city is a vision of hell. The sky, even at noon, is a bruised twilight, choked with a permanent cloud of black and ochre smoke. The air tastes of sulfur and grit. The Allegheny River runs slick with industrial filth. This is the furnace of the Union, and its business is war. In our timeline, this was the crucible of the Gilded Age, forging the steel for 1,000 cities, the rails that would stitch a continent together, the skeleton of a modern world. But here, the great steel mills of Andrew Carnegie are not churning out I-beams for skyscrapers or bridges across the Mississippi. They are rolling out 8-inch thick steel plates for armored railroad cars. The machine shops are not building reaping machines to harvest the vast prairies. They are assembling Gatling guns by the thousand. This is the garrison economy, the explosive, chaotic, and creative capitalism of our Gilded Age never happened. The great westward expansion was throttled in its cradle. The homesteaders who would have settled Kansas and Nebraska were instead conscripted into the army for tours in the southern military districts. The capital that would have financed the transcontinental railroad was instead poured into war bonds to fund the endless occupation. The American economy did not boom, it metastasized. Its primary, and almost sole, major customer is the United States War Department. Your real-world anchor here is not a person but an institution. The Pennsylvania Railroad. In our history, it was the largest corporation in the world, a symbol of private enterprise. Here, it is a quasi-state entity, its fortunes indivisibly linked to the federal government. Its president, Thomas A. Scott, is not a private tycoon. He is the most powerful man in America outside of the White House. During the war, Scott was the logistical genius who moved Union armies. Now, in the long peace that is not peace, his railroad is the artery that keeps the occupation alive. His trains, clad in iron, shuttle troops, munitions, and federal marshals south, and return with tariff-enforced southern cotton and timber, the profits of which go directly into the federal treasury, to pay for more troops and more armored trains. It is a perfect, closed loop of extraction and suppression. You see the creation of a new American elite. They are not the audacious risk-takers of our history. The Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and Morgans, who built empires of oil, transport, and finance. They are a more cautious, more sinister breed. The government contractor. They are the men who own the textile mills in Massachusetts that have a permanent contract to produce Union blue uniforms. They are the meat packers in Chicago who have a monopoly on providing salt pork to the garrisons. They are the financiers in New York whose banks exist solely to underwrite the ever-expanding federal debt. They build their stone mansions on Fifth Avenue not with profits from innovation, but with the steady, guaranteed income of state-sponsored violence. They are the staunchest supporters of President Hamlin and the radical Republicans, because their wealth depends entirely on the continuation of the Southern problem. Peace would be their ruin. And here you find the shocking, unexpected twist. The relentless focus on military necessity has utterly choked civilian innovation. America in the late 1870s is a technological backwater in all but the arts of war. There is no Alexander Graham Bell tinkering with a harmonic telegraph. The brightest electrical engineers are employed by the Signal Corps, perfecting encrypted messaging systems to coordinate troop movements. There is no Thomas Edison building a laboratory at Menlo Park to invent the light bulb or the phonograph. His kind of chaotic, market-driven genius has no place in this state-directed economy. Any innovations he might propose would be judged solely on their military application. Could a light bulb illuminate a perimeter fence at a POW camp? Could a phonograph record a rebel's confession? If not, it is a frivolous waste of resources. The patent office is a sleepy place, filled mostly with designs for improved bayonets, new types of canned rations, and more efficient artillery shells. The vibrant consumer society that exploded into being in our late 19th century is stillborn here. Life for the average northern citizen is grey, functional, and expensive. a world of military-grade utility and little else. This exposes the horrifying ethical tension at the core of the garrison economy. You are a worker in a Pittsburgh steel mill. You have a job, you can feed your family. The mill has never had a layoff because the government's demand for armor plating is insatiable. You enjoy a grim security unknown to the boom and bust cycles of our timeline, but you are trapped. Your prosperity, such as it is built on the subjugation of the South. The steel plate you are wrestling into place with a team of sweat-soaked men will be used to protect a train carrying soldiers who will burn a town in Alabama. The high taxes you pay on every good you buy are used to fund this occupation. You listen to the politicians talk of patriotic duty and national security, but you know, in a deep and unspoken way, that you are a jailer. Worse, you are terrified of peace. If the insurgency in the South were to collapse, if the government were to declare victory and bring the troops home, the orders for armor plate would cease. The mill would fall silent. You would be out of a job. Your family would starve. You are economically chained to the very conflict that drains the nation's soul. You pray for an end to the war, and you pray that it never, ever ends. Walking through the soot-stained streets, past the grim-faced workers and the hulking factories dedicated to the machinery of control, you understand the true cost of Hamlin's righteous victory. The North won the war, but it lost its own future. It has become a nation that knows how to police, how to punish, and how to kill, but has forgotten how to build, to invent, and to dream. The dynamism that would have made America a world power has been channeled into a single, sterile task, holding down half of its own country. The garrison economy provides stability, but it is the stability of a prison for the wardens in the North as much as for the inmates in the South. You pull back from the industrial hellscape of the North, seeking silence. You travel west, out beyond the Mississippi. The world opens up. The sky becomes a crushing, impossibly vast dome of blue. The land is a rolling sea of grass that stretches to the curve of the earth. In our history, by 1880, this land was scored with railroad tracks, carved into square-mile plots, and haunted by the ghosts of the 60 million bison that had been systematically annihilated. It was a land that had been tamed, broken, and remade in the image of the conqueror. But as you stand on a bluff overlooking the Platte River Valley, you see not a single railroad tie, not one strand of barbed wire, and on the horizon, you see not a small remnant herd of buffalo, but a dark, thundering mass that shakes the very ground you stand on, a river of life, miles wide and miles long. The great herds are still here, and they are here because their human partners, the peoples of the plains, are not defeated. They are masters of this domain. This is the great, unintended consequence of the war without end. The United States Army, the instrument of Western expansion, has been tied down for 15 years in a brutal occupation of the South. The legions of Custer, Sheridan, and Crook were never sent west. They were sent to garrison Vicksburg, to chase Forrest's phantoms through the Tennessee hills, to die of yellow fever in the Louisiana swamps. The national will, focused with monomaniacal intensity on punishing the Confederacy, had no energy left for manifest destiny. The cry of "On to Richmond" had drowned out the cry of "Westward ho!" Your real-world anchor is a man who in our timeline was a ghost of a past victory. But here is a founding father, Red Cloud of the Oglala Lakota. His war against the U.S. Army in the late 1860s was, in this timeline, a definitive, unreversed triumph. The U.S. government, desperate to avoid a second front, signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie, and for once honored it. They had to. They lacked the soldiers to break it. This singular victory, this show of American weakness, gave the Plains tribes something they never had in our history: time. time to think, time to adapt, time to unite. You are witnessing the fruit of that time. You see a band of Cheyenne dog soldiers riding patrol along the river. They are not the bedraggled warriors of reservation photographs. They are confident, muscular men, their horses sleek and powerful. But it's what they carry that freezes your blood. They are not armed with bows or aging muskets. They are carrying brand new lever-action Winchester repeating rifles. This is the shocking, deadly twist in the story of the West. While the US turned inward, other powers looked on with interest. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, led by the combined genius of Red Cloud's statesmanship, Sitting Bull's spiritual vision, and Crazy Horse's tactical brilliance, did not simply remain static. They formed a permanent military and political alliance, the Iron Confederacy, and they went shopping for allies and weapons. They found willing partners in the most unlikely of places, the Confederate government, in exile in Emperor Maximilian's Mexico. Bitter, brilliant men, former Confederate ordnance officers and quartermasters, saw an opportunity. In exchange for gold, horses, and a promise to harry the US flank, they began a steady flow of modern European and American-style firearms north through the lands of their allies, the Comanche and Kiowa. They taught the Confederacy's tacticians how to maintain these weapons, how to manufacture cartridges, and how to fight not just as raiders, but as a coordinated light cavalry. The result is the formation of a true, independent nation-state in the heart of the continent. It doesn't have cities of stone. Its capital is a mobile, superbly organized city of 10,000 tipis that follows the herds. It has a formal council, diplomatic relations with Mexico, and, through them, with France and the British in Canada. The Iron Confederacy controls a vast territory from the Rocky Mountains to the Missouri River, from the Platte to the border of Canada. They are the new power on the continent. This brings you face to face with a profound ethical tension. You journey to the heart of this new Lakota nation, perhaps as a trader from a British fur company. You admire their strength, their freedom, their proud refusal to bow to the broken republic to the east. You see a culture thriving, a people living in balance with their world, a historical injustice seemingly averted. But this is not a gentle utopia. Power is still power. The Lakota are the undisputed hegemons of this new reality, and they are not always benevolent rulers. You travel with a Lakota war party not against the Americans, but against the Pawnee. The Pawnee, a tribe that often scouted for the US Army in our timeline, are the historical enemies of the Sioux. Here, they are a rival to be crushed. You witness a raid on a Pawnee village that is as brutal and total as any attack on a settler wagon train. The repeating rifles, once the tools of their would-be conquerors, are now used to enforce Lakota dominance. This is not the simple story of oppressed natives rising up. This is the story of one power vacuum being filled by another power. The Lakota ascendancy has meant liberation and prosperity for the Sioux and their allies, but it has meant subjugation and terror for their native rivals, like the Crow, the Arikara, and the Pawnee. They are consolidating their empire, standing under the vast silent sky, watching the council fires of the mighty Iron Confederacy. You understand the complexity of history's equation. Hamlin's obsessive war in the South, intended to forge one unified America, has instead guaranteed the existence of at least three: the punishing, stagnant North, the broken, rebellious South, and here, in the West, a new and vigorous empire of horse and grass and iron, born from American distraction. The continent is no longer destined to be one nation, coast to coast. A new border has been drawn, not by treaty, but by the barrels of 10,000 rifles in the hands of men who were never conquered. You turn your gaze back to the north. the victor in the Civil War, the metropole of the new American empire. You walk the streets of Boston or Philadelphia in 1885, 2 decades after the August calamity. On the surface, things seem orderly. The streets are clean, patrolled by uniformed constables. The factories churn out their contracted goods. The government, under the perpetual emergency powers of the radical Republican machine, is stable. But you feel an unnerving silence, a cultural hollowness that hangs in the air like the ever-present coal smoke. The vibrant, chaotic, argumentative soul of the old republic is gone. In its place is something new, something grim and martial. This is the Republic of Scars. The wound of Lincoln's assassination never healed. The ongoing low-grade guerrilla war in the South became a chronic infection that slowly poisoned the national psyche. The defining national experience for 2 decades was not one of reconciliation and boundless optimism, but of treachery, vengeance, and permanent, costly vigilance. This has fundamentally reshaped Northern culture. You step into a bookstore. In our timeline, the post-war years saw a flowering of American literature. The grand, sweeping poetry of Walt Whitman celebrating the democratic individual, the realist novels of William Dean Howells exploring social complexities, the sly, anti-authoritarian humor of Mark Twain. None of this exists here. These voices were products of a peace that never came. Whitman, in this world, is a marginal figure. His democratic ecstasies seem naive, even dangerous, in a nation that values conformity and order above all. Twain's humor, which mocks pomposity and authority, is seen as seditious. Instead, the shelves are filled with what critics call the Iron School of literature. The novels are grim, stoic tales of duty and sacrifice. The heroes are not trailblazing individuals but cogs in the great machine of the state. Stoic army officers putting down rebellions, iron-willed federal agents uncovering secessionist plots, tireless factory managers meeting government production quotas. The prose is sparse, direct, and humorless. It is a literature of the garrison, for the garrison. Its most famous author is not a riverboat pilot from Missouri, but a one-armed Union general named Lew Wallace. His real-world anchor, the novel Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, exists here. But it is a radically different book. It is not a story of faith and redemption. It is a grim, martial epic. The central conflict is not between Judah Ben-Hur and Messala, but between the disciplined order of the Roman legion and the chaotic fanaticism of zealot insurgents. It is a thinly veiled allegory for the American occupation of the South, and its message is unequivocal. Resistance to imperial order is a suicidal folly that invites righteous destruction. The book is a massive bestseller, required reading in federal schools. This cultural shift reveals a shocking, unexpected twist. The death of American ingenuity, not just in technology, but in spirit. The unique American characteristic of irreverent, individualistic problem-solving has been replaced by a deep-seated suspicion of non-conformity. The prevailing philosophy is not transcendentalism or pragmatism, but a harsh, state-centric form of social Darwinism. The state is the supreme organism, and its survival justifies all actions. Political dissent is not a healthy part of a democracy. It is a sign of weakness, a disease to be quarantined. The universities Harvard, Yale, Princeton are no longer liberal arts institutions dedicated to free inquiry. They have become national service academies, churning out the administrators, military officers, and engineers needed to manage the empire. The curriculum emphasizes discipline, history, a heavily censored version focusing on Confederate perfidy, and the practical sciences of logistics and statecraft. Philosophy and the arts are relegated to trivial side pursuits. You see the ethical tension of this world play out in a family's living room in a Boston brownstone. A father, a mid-level bureaucrat in the War Department, is speaking with his son, who has just turned 18. The son is not dreaming of heading west to seek his fortune or starting a new business. His highest aspiration is to secure a commission in the Federal Army of Occupation. It is a safe career, a respectable one, the surest path to advancement in this society. The father is proud. He sees his son following a path of duty and service to the Union. But as you look around the room, you see what has been lost. The furniture is heavy and functional. There are no novels lying about, only volumes of military history and government reports. A portrait of the grim-faced President Hamlin hangs on the wall where a family photo might have been. The conversation is stripped of humour, of dreams, of any ambition beyond service to the national machine. They are safe, they are loyal, but they are not free in the way their grandfathers understood the word. Their minds have been garrisoned, just like the southern states. The ethical trade-off is stark. The North achieved the total subjugation of its enemy, but at the cost of its own intellectual and spiritual freedom. It has become the thing it fought against. A rigid, militaristic society obsessed with loyalty and willing to sacrifice liberty for the sake of order. This Republic of Scars is a nation that has forgotten how to laugh. Its patriotism is not the boisterous, confident flag-waving of our Gilded Age, but a somber, demanding creed. The assassination of Lincoln and the endless war that followed did not just scar the bodies of a generation of soldiers. It scarred the very soul of the nation, leaving it rigid, fearful, and perpetually looking over its shoulder for the next traitor, the next rebellion, the next threat to a union held together not by love or shared ideals, but by fear and iron. You must go back south, back to the heat, the humidity, and the ever-present tension. You need to see what has become of the 4 million people whose fate was the central question of the war. You journey to the Sea Islands of South Carolina, a place where, in 1890, the population is almost entirely black. The air is thick with the smell of salt marsh and wood smoke. You see not the ramshackle shacks of tenant farmers, but orderly rows of whitewashed cottages, each surrounded by a fence enclosing a neat plot of land. You see well-tended fields of cotton and rice, a gristmill powered by a small steam engine, and a brick schoolhouse with children's voices spilling from its open windows. This is the promise of the Hamlin Proscriptions made real. Here, in these coastal enclaves, and in protected zones across the South, you witness something that never happened in our timeline: the mass establishment of a landed African-American yeomanry. This is not a dream. The deeds are real. The land is theirs. This community, which we'll call St. Helena Parish, is your real-world Ancora place where early experiments in black land ownership took place even in our history. But here, it is not an experiment. It is the bedrock of a new society. The people of St. Helena are not just farmers. They have their own sheriffs, their own judges, their own representatives in the state legislature in Charleston, legislature from which proscribed whites are barred and whose proceedings are guarded by federal troops. They are citizens in a fuller sense than their counterparts ever were in our Reconstruction. They have economic power derived from their land and political power derived from the solid backing of the Union Army. You see men and women who carry themselves with a dignity and confidence born of ownership, a people who are not asking for a place in society, but are building their own. You talk to a school teacher, a graduate of a federally funded college in Atlanta, and she speaks of her generation's duty to create a new Zion on the soil where their parents were enslaved. It is a stunning achievement, a radical inversion of the old order. But as you walk to the edge of the parish, the illusion of utopia shatters. Just beyond the last homestead stands a 30-foot-tall wooden watchtower, and in it you see the glint of the sun on a spyglass and the dark blue uniform of a U.S. Army sentry. 100 yards beyond that, You see a small, formidable stone fortress, a permanent federal garrison. And past the fort, the landscape changes. You see dilapidated farmhouses, fields choked with weeds, and on the porch of one shack, you see the sullen, hate-filled faces of a poor white family. This is the shocking, brutal paradox of this new reality. The freedom of black Southerners is real, but it is entirely conditional. They are living not in a free society, but in a gilded cage. Their prosperity, their political power, their very lives depend on the perpetual military occupation. They are a client class, inextricably bound to the radical Republican government in Washington. Every right they possess, every acre they own, is guaranteed by the bayonets of the Union Army. And they know it. This creates an agonizing ethical tension that permeates every aspect of their existence. You attend a political rally in the parish square. The speaker, a charismatic black state senator, thunders his support for the Republican Party, for the continued funding of the occupation, for harsher laws against the night riders who terrorize the borders of their enclave. The crowd roars its approval. They are voting not out of ideology, but for survival. Their political choices are not choices at all. To vote for the Democratic Party, a party that exists in the North, but whose rhetoric speaks of states' rights and ending the occupation, would be to vote for their own dispossession and probable death. Their relationship with the white soldiers who protect them is equally fraught with tension. The soldiers are their guardians, but also their wardens. The commander of the local fort is the ultimate authority, a man who can overrule their elected judges. The soldiers, many of whom are Irish or German immigrants conscripted on arrival, harbour their own prejudices. They trade with the black community. They protect them from the clan-like insurgents, but there is an unbridgeable social gulf between them. The black community of St. Helena is simultaneously empowered and powerless. They are masters of their own small world, but that world is a fishbowl, surrounded by a hungry ocean of hostility, with its oxygen piped in by an external and not always benevolent power. This gilded cage stunts their development in unexpected ways. While they achieve economic security, they are cut off from the broader national currents. Their culture becomes insular and defensive. Their young men, instead of migrating to northern cities to find industrial jobs, which are scarce in the garrison economy anyway, enlist in the Federal Army's segregated coloured Home Guard regiments, finding that the profession of arms is their surest career. A deep, militaristic streak enters their society, born of the necessity of permanent vigilance. They are free from the shackles of slavery, but are now bound by the chains of dependency on a garrison state. They have traded a master on the plantation for a protector in the fort, and they are not entirely sure if true freedom lies with either. As dusk falls over the island, you hear singing from a church. It is a powerful, beautiful sound. But listening closely to the words, you realize they are not just spirituals of hope and deliverance. They are martial hymns, songs that praise the God of armies who smote the Pharaoh, songs that call for righteous vengeance against the Amalekites who lurk in the forests beyond their protected zone. They have land, they have votes, they have schools, but they have no peace. They are a free people living in a permanent state of war. You are in Washington, D.C. now, in the autumn of 1872. This is the capital of the Union, but it no longer feels like the capital of a republic. The nervous, temporary energy of the war years has solidified into something permanent and heavy. The city is clean, orderly, and profoundly imposing. New, severe-looking granite buildings house the sprawling federal bureaucracies, the War Department, the Treasury, the Bureau of National Readjustment. There is a palpable sense of gravity, of a power that is centralized and sure of itself. Uniformed army officers are a common sight on the streets. striding with a purpose that civilians seem to lack. The city feels less like a forum for boisterous democratic debate and more like the administrative heart of an empire. And at the center of this empire sits the man who has commanded it since the August calamity, President Hannibal Hamlin. He is older now, his hair entirely white, his stern face carved with the deep lines of a man who has wielded immense power for 8 unrelenting years. He rarely smiles. His public addresses are not Lincoln's folksy appeals to a shared heritage. They are concise, powerful pronouncements of national will. He is seeking a 3rd term as President of the United States, an act that consciously defies the sacred, unspoken precedent set by George Washington. This campaign for a 3rd term is your real-world anchor, echoing the later controversy over a potential 3rd term for Ulysses S. Grant. But here, it is not a tentative exploration. It is a calculated political strategy. In the chambers of Congress and the private clubs where the nation's powerful men gather, the debate is framed not in terms of ambition, but of necessity. Can the Union risk a change in leadership while the rebellion still smoulders? Asks a radical Republican senator in a speech to party faithful. Can we betray the millions of loyal freedmen whose lives depend on President Hamlin's unwavering resolve? Can we show weakness to the puppet emperor in Mexico, who shelters our assassins and arms our enemies on the plains? In the world of the Republic of Scars, these are not questions. They are statements. The arguments are impossible to refute. The Democratic Party, forever stained by its association with the pre-assassination peace movement, is a shadow of its former self. To run on a platform of reconciliation or ending the occupation is to be publicly branded a traitor. Their candidates are harassed. Their rallies are broken up by patriotic leagues of Union veterans, and their newspapers are routinely shut down by federal marshals for publishing seditious materials that might give aid and comfort to the enemy. The party of the Union has become the party of the state. This is where the unexpected, chilling twist emerges. In its crusade to preserve the American Republic from its internal enemies, the radical Republican Party has systematically dismantled its core democratic structures. They have become the mirror image of the centralized, autocratic powers they once defined themselves against. Loyalty oaths are required for all federal employees, from cabinet secretaries to rural postmasters. The Bureau of National Readjustment, created to manage the South, has quietly expanded its mandate. Its agents now tasked with monitoring subversive groups in the North. Political advancement is impossible without the explicit approval of the party machine. The grand old party, born from a movement to expand liberty, now maintains its power by suppressing it. The United States has become a functional one-party state. Its leader, the perpetual president, begins to look less like George Washington and more like his geopolitical rival, Emperor Maximilian. In a strange, dark irony, the Union's methods for maintaining control over its own restive territory, military occupation, suppression of political dissent, the empowerment of a loyal client class, and a state-directed economy are almost identical to the methods the French Empire used to secure its hold over Mexico. The radical Republican project to save the Republic has killed it, replacing it with a grimly efficient administrative state, governed by a permanent ruling party and a president who holds office not by popular consent, but by the logic of perpetual crisis. This leads to a soul-crushing ethical tension, which you witness in the private library of an elite New York City club. Elias Thorne, a respected lawyer and intellectual, is one of the original abolitionists. He marched and wrote and donated his fortune to the cause of ending slavery. He celebrated Hamlin's rise and the promise of a war fought for pure, righteous justice. But now his face is etched with disillusionment. He is speaking in a hushed, urgent tone to a party apparatchik, a man whose suit is a bit too fine, whose face is a bit too smooth. You speak of necessity, Thorne whispers, gesturing at a newspaper article praising Hamlin's decision to seek a third term. But we have been ruling by necessity for 8 years. We suspend habeas corpus in Ohio because of a riot we provoked. We shut down the New York World because it dares to question the cost of the occupation. We are celebrating the creation of a landed class in the South, who cannot vote their conscience for fear of annihilation. Tell me, when does the emergency end? The party man sighs, swirling the brandy in his glass. It ends when the war ends, Elias, and the war ends when the last rebel lays down his arms and accepts the authority of the United States government. Until then, any sign of division, of weakness, it's a weapon we hand to Forrest and his night riders. It is a death sentence for the freedmen you spent your life fighting for. Would you have us abandon them to the wolves for a quaint principle written on parchment a century ago? You see the trap closing around Thorne's conscience. Everything the party man says is, in the context of this world, true. To advocate for a return to pre-war civil liberties is to risk the entire project. It would embolden the insurgents and endanger the lives of millions of black unionists in the South. To uphold the democratic ideal would have a real human cost. And so, Thorne must choose. He can speak out, joining the politically untouchable Democrats and becoming a pariah, a traitor to the cause, potentially undoing the one great moral victory of his life. Or he can remain silent, endorsing a regime that has sacrificed the very meaning of liberty on the altar of order. The election of 1,872 is not a surprise. It is a ritual. Hannibal Hamlin wins a third term with over 70% of the popular vote. The machinery of the state and party works perfectly. On Inauguration Day in March 1873, you stand in the crowd and watch him take the oath. His speech is short and to the point. He speaks of duty, of resolve, of the long, hard road still ahead. There is no poetry. There is only iron. The breaking of the two-term precedent is no longer a taboo. It is the new normal. The presidency is no longer a temporary trust. It is a command. The American experiment in self-governance has ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, efficient click of a key turning in a lock. The perpetual state of emergency does not just transform politics and culture. It reshapes the very nature of invention. You are now inside the secret heart of the garrison economy at the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts in the year 1888. This isn't the chaotic workshop of a lone genius like Edison's Menlo Park. This is the Federal Proving Ground, a sprawling state-funded campus of laboratories and machine shops, walled off from the public by high brick fences and armed guards. This is where the future is being built in Hamlin's America, and it is a future designed for one purpose: control. The creative energy that in our world was scattered across thousands of small entrepreneurs, all competing to create products for a mass consumer market, is here concentrated into a single, disciplined channel. The government isn't asking, what does the public want to buy? It is asking, what do our garrisons in the South need to maintain order? Your real-world anchor is the Gatling gun, an early machine gun that saw limited use in our Civil War. Here, it is the centerpiece of a technological revolution. Its inventor, Richard Gatling, is not a private citizen. He is the highly paid director of ballistic innovation, a federal post. His original, hand-cranked design is seen as a primitive relic. In the labs at Springfield, you see the next generation. Engineers are not working on phonographs. They are perfecting electrically driven Gatling guns, powered by portable steam dynamos, capable of firing 1,000 rounds a minute. They are designing lighter, more mobile versions to be mounted on swift armored carriages. The weapon has evolved from a battlefield curiosity into the ultimate tool of population suppression. This obsession with pacification has led to a cascade of unexpected technological leaps, all in the service of military control. This is the dark twist of this era's innovation. You see engineers perfecting what they call the electric sentinel, a primitive form of motion sensor that can be placed along perimeter fences of forts and supply depots, triggering alarms and electric searchlights. In another lab, men are experimenting with telegraphic photography, a way to transmit crude, blocky images of suspected insurgents over the wire, from a regional command post to the central headquarters in Washington, decades before such technology would appear in our world. But the most significant innovation is the one that is transforming the arteries of the occupation, the railroads. You witness a demonstration of the newest weapon in the federal arsenal, the USAV Vindicator, which stands for United States Armored Vehicle. It's not a tank, it's a train, a terrifying one. The locomotive is completely encased in a shell of 1-inch steel plate, with narrow slits for the engineer to see. Behind it are not passenger cars, but a series of interconnected mobile blockhouses. There is a barracks car for 50 soldiers. There is a telegraph car, its antenna bristling on the roof, capable of communicating with any garrison along the line. There is a Gatling car, a rolling fortress with 4 electrically powered machine guns mounted in rotating turrets. And most chillingly, there is an interrogation car, windowless and soundproofed. This is not transportation. This is a mobile instrument of imperial power, capable of racing down the tracks at 50 miles per hour to any hotspot, any reported uprising, and dispensing overwhelming, technologically advanced violence. These are the Iron Horsemen of the American apocalypse. They are the physical manifestation of the garrison state's soul, efficient, ruthless, and utterly inhuman. Their creation and deployment create a stark ethical tension for the very men who build them. You are an engineer in the Springfield Proving Ground, a brilliant young man from a family of New England clockmakers. You grew up tinkering with gears and springs, fascinated by the elegant solutions of mechanics. Now, you apply that God-given talent to designing a more efficient ammunition feed for a Gatling gun. You solve a complex mathematical problem to create a targeting system for the Vindicator's guns that can account for the speed of the train. You are celebrated for your genius. You live a comfortable life. You are told, and you tell yourself, that your work saves the lives of Union soldiers. You tell yourself that the order you help enforce is what allows the schools and homesteads of the freedmen to exist. But one night, working late over your blueprints, you see a report from the field. It describes how one of your new targeting systems was used by a Vindicator crew to pacify a village in the Mississippi backcountry suspected of harboring insurgents. The report speaks of total and effective suppression with minimal federal casualties. You stare at the cold bureaucratic language, and you see through it to the reality: women and children cut down by the precise mechanical hurricane of fire that you helped to perfect. The elegant solution you designed, the beautiful harmony of gears and levers that gave you such intellectual satisfaction, was used to murder people from a moving train. Your hands, the hands of a craftsman and an innovator, are stained with blood from 1,000 miles away. You feel a surge of revulsion, a desire to smash your tools and walk away. But where would you go? The state is the only employer for a man of your talents. And to speak out, to refuse to work, would be to brand yourself a sympathizer, a potential traitor. You would lose your job, your home, your social standing. You would become an enemy of the state you so capably serve. So, the next morning, you go back to your drafting table, you bury the report at the bottom of a drawer, you sharpen your pencil and focus on the next problem the War Department has given you, designing a more durable track that can withstand sabotage from rebel bombs. You quiet your conscience by focusing on the intellectual beauty of the technical challenge. You pour your genius, your humanity, your soul into the machine of oppression, because the alternative is to be ground up in its gears. The American mind, once a tool of liberation and expansive creativity, has become a tool of exquisite, state-of-the-art bondage. And the best and brightest minds are the ones forging the strongest chains. You pull away from the troubled shores of America and find yourself in the heart of the old world, in Berlin, capital of the German Empire. It is the dawn of the 20th century, 1905. The air here is electric, not with dread, but with ambition. Berlin is a city that knows it is the center of the world. It is muscular, modern, and radiating an almost frightening self-confidence. The broad avenues are clean. The new monumental buildings speak of power and permanence, and the soldiers goose-stepping past the Brandenburg Gate look like the masters of Europe. They are. The point of divergence in America, that single gunshot in August 1864, has had profound, unforeseen consequences on the global stage. A strong, unified, and industrially booming United States would have been a significant counterbalance to the rising powers of Europe. Its economic might, its democratic ideology, and its eventual naval power would have factored into every calculation made in London, Paris, and Berlin. But Hamlin's America is not that nation. It is an isolationist, internally focused garrison state, obsessed with its southern insurgency and the hostile Mexican Empire on its border. Its economy is stagnant. Its military is designed for counterinsurgency, not for projecting power across oceans, and its diplomatic voice is a whisper. America, quite simply, does not matter to the grand strategists of Europe. This absence has left a vacuum, and one man filled it completely. Your real-world anchor is not a person this time, but an event. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71. In our timeline, it was a stunning but limited victory that created the German Empire. In this timeline, without a strong America to mediate or exert subtle diplomatic pressure for a lenient peace, the outcome was far harsher. The French, already destabilized, and without any potential future ally on the horizon, fought on with desperate ferocity and were utterly crushed. The peace treaty was not a negotiation, it was a diktat. Germany annexed not only Alsace-Lorraine, but the entire Champagne region, and imposed war indemnities so crippling that they permanently hobbled the French economy. France was neutered as a great power. You are witnessing the world that resulted from this unchecked German victory. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, guided this new Reich for nearly 3 decades with brilliant, ruthless diplomacy, and his successor, the bombastic Kaiser Wilhelm II, now presides over an empire that dominates the continent in a way not seen since Napoleon. Britain, with its sprawling maritime empire, has been forced into a policy of nervous accommodation. Austria-Hungary is a junior partner. Russia is a brooding, wary rival, but one too internally fragile to challenge Germany's industrial and military machine directly. The concert of Europe is a German symphony, and the Kaiser is its conductor. This is the shocking geopolitical twist. Without America as a future player, the global game of chess is entirely different. Germany's colonial ambitions, which in our world were tempered by competition from Britain, France, and a rising US, went wild. You see a map of Africa in a Berlin schoolroom. Deutsche Mittelafrika is a solid band of German territory stretching from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, a vast and profitable empire secured through a series of treaties and colonial wars that faced no serious international opposition. The Kaiser's navy, built with the full might of German industry, is a credible rival to the Royal Navy. The world's economic engine is not in London or New York, it is in the Ruhr Valley. This reality presents a deeply unsettling ethical tension. You are a British diplomat attending a state dinner at the Kaiser's Palace in Potsdam. The opulence is breathtaking. The conversation is confident, cultured, and intelligent. The German officials speak of their civilizing mission in Africa, of the order and efficiency they are bringing to the continent. They talk about their scientific advancements, their social welfare programs, Bismarck's pioneering old-age pensions, and health insurance, which are the most advanced in the world. They have created a society that is, in many ways, stable, prosperous, and far more orderly than the chaotic democracies. You are seated next to a high-ranking German industrialist, a Herr Krupp, whose factories produce the massive naval guns for the high seas fleet. He is not a monster. He is a sophisticated man, a patron of the arts, a believer in German culture. He raises his champagne glass. "We see what has happened to the Americans," he says, his tone a mixture of pity and contempt. "All that talk of freedom and the rights of man, and it led them to 50 years of squalid, fratricidal warfare. They have freedom. Yes, the freedom to be weak, to be poor, to be irrelevant. We chose a different path. We chose discipline, order, unity. And under the Kaiser's leadership, we have brought peace and prosperity to Europe. A German peace, it is true, but peace nonetheless." Every word he says seems, on the surface, logical. There has been no major war in Europe for over 30 years. His nation is a marvel of science and organization. Meanwhile, the America you know is a tragic, stagnant failure. But as you look around the glittering hall, you feel a profound chill. This German peace is the peace of the wolf in the sheepfold. It is a peace maintained by the sheer, overwhelming threat of military force. The cultures of France, of Poland, of the Czechs are being systematically suppressed within this German-dominated order. The system's efficiency is that of an autocracy, accountable to no one but the Kaiser. The world is stable, but it is not free. You realize that America's internal failure had a global cost. The ideal it represented, however imperfectly the ideal of a large, multi-ethnic republic governed by laws and consent, not by blood and iron, was a crucial part of the world's ecosystem. Its spectacular failure has discredited that ideal everywhere. Republicanism and democracy are seen as the pathways to chaos and civil war. Monarchism, militarism, and empire are seen as the wave of the future. The light of liberty wasn't just extinguished in the American South. Its dimming cast a long shadow over the entire planet, allowing a different, colder, and more authoritarian sun to rise uncontested in the heart of Europe. You return to America, to the fractured nation at the turn of the century. It's 1908. You want to understand what a half-century of Cold War between North and South has done to the very idea of being American. The concept no longer exists. It has been shattered and replaced by two irreconcilable identities, forged in the fires of the endless insurgency and the grim occupation. You are standing on a bridge, not of steel but of culture and memory. The bridge is the Ohio River, and crossing it is like passing through a fissure in time. On the northern side, in Cincinnati, American means one thing: loyalty. Unconditional, unwavering loyalty to the Union and the federal government. You see it everywhere. School children begin their day not just with a pledge to the flag, but with a recitation of the Oath of Union, a solemn vow to defend the federal government against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The flag itself, your real-world anchor, is different. In the years after the assassination, in a wave of vengeful patriotism, Congress passed a law mandating the removal of the stars representing the traitor states. The flag flying over the Cincinnati post office has only 25 stars, representing the states that remained loyal, including the newly admitted states carved from the loyal West. It is a stark, visual representation of a nation defined not by inclusion, but by exclusion. The culture is one of conformity and sober duty. the grim inheritance of the Republic of Scars. Patriotism is a grim business. Then you cross the John A. Roebling Suspension Bridge into Covington, Kentucky, and you are in another country. Here, in the South, the word American is a slur. It is the name you call the occupying soldiers, the federal tax collectors, the northern corporate agents who run the big plantations. It is synonymous with tyrant, invader, godless. To be a Southerner is to define oneself in opposition to that. Their identity is one of proud, stubborn, romantic rebellion. It is a culture built on a rich soil of grievances, nourished by the blood of martyrs and the poetry of defeat. You walk through the streets of Covington, and the signs of this separate cultural nationality are everywhere. The official currency is the US dollar, but local trade is often conducted using greybacks, a semi-legal scrip issued by local redeemer merchants, a nod to the old Confederate currency. Young men don't greet each other with a handshake, but with a subtle, complex gesture of the hand that originated as a secret sign among Forrest's raiders. They do not look to Washington for leadership. Their heroes are the executed leaders of the Confederacy. Lee, Jackson, Davis are spoken of with the hushed reverence reserved for saints. Their statues are not in public squares, which are controlled by the Federals, but in the courtyards of churches and the private gardens of old families. This is the deeply ironic, unexpected twist. Hamlin's campaign to extinguish Southern identity has instead made it immortal. By executing the Confederate leadership, he transformed them from defeated generals into transcendent martyrs. By suppressing their political power, he forced them to build a powerful parallel culture outside of politics. By garrisoning their cities, he gave them a constant, visible reminder of their own distinctiveness and subjugation. The North's hard war created the very thing it sought to destroy, an unbreakable sense of Southern nationhood. This schism manifests in every aspect of life, creating a deep, ethical tension within families and communities that straddle this new border. You are visiting the home of a family in a border town, perhaps Ripley, Ohio, famous stop on the Underground Railroad in our timeline. The patriarch of the family is an old man who fought for the Union. His loyalty to the 25-star flag is absolute. His son, however, married a woman from Kentucky. His business takes him south, where he must deal with the redeemer merchants, use their scrip, and maintain a quiet, careful neutrality just to survive. His grandson, a boy of 16, is torn. At his school in Ohio, he recites the Oath of Union and learns of the great betrayal of the Confederacy. But when he visits his mother's family in Kentucky, he hears epic poems about General Forrest's daring raids. He sees the hidden portraits of Robert E. Lee. He hears the whispers about the latest ambush of a federal patrol, spoken with a thrill of pride. For him, the word American is a source of profound confusion and conflict. Is it his grandfather, the stern, loyal Union veteran? Or is it his other grandfather, a man who rode with John Hunt Morgan and whose portrait his Kentucky grandmother keeps shrouded in black cloth? Which history is his? Which set of martyrs should he honor? His identity is a civil war in miniature. This internal conflict is happening in millions of souls along the soft, bleeding border between the two Americas. There is no shared ground, no common set of facts, no single story. To celebrate Lincoln in the North is an act of patriotism. To even speak his name in the South is a grievous insult. To name a child Robert or Lee in the South is to honor a hero. To do so in the North is a mark of suspected sedition. You realize the profoundest consequence of the failure of Reconstruction. It is not political or economic. It is ontological. It is a severing of the shared reality that constitutes a single people. The United States is no longer a country. It is a geographical expression, a territory occupied by two distinct peoples locked in a state of low-grade, perpetual conflict, each with its own language, its own rituals, its own heroes, and its own non-negotiable truths. And you wonder if such a deep wound in the fabric of a nation can ever be mended, or if the two American peoples are now fated to drift apart forever, two strangers living under the same broken roof. The years roll on, and you find yourself standing on the docks of Castle Garden in New York City, 1895. The air is damp and smells of salt, coal, and unwashed bodies. A ship has just arrived from Hamburg, and its human cargo is spilling onto the pier. They are gaunt, hopeful, and terrified. They are Polish, Italian, Jewish, and Slavic immigrants, fleeing the poverty and turmoil of a Europe dominated by the German Reich. In our history, they would have been met with the bewildering, chaotic promise of a new life, the dream of a farm in the West, or a job in a bustling factory. But here, their first encounter with the New World is profoundly different. The real-world anchor is not a Statue of Liberty, but a long, grim, functional shed. Over the door, a sign reads, United States Army Bureau of Enlistment and Relocation. This is the stark reality for immigrants in Hamlin's America. They are not seen as future citizens. They are seen as raw material. The garrison economy, with its focus on military production and its lack of civilian dynamism, creates few jobs for unskilled labor. The great westward expansion that absorbed millions in our timeline is a fantasy blocked by the Iron Confederacy. But the occupation of the South has an insatiable appetite for men. The sons of Ohio farmers and Boston Brahmins are no longer willing to serve endless, dangerous tours in the swamps of Mississippi. The war has become unpopular, a costly, bloody chore. The government found a solution. If you cannot conscript your own unwilling citizens, import new ones who have no other choice. So, a system is born. You watch it in action. A gruff, German-speaking army sergeant addresses the new arrivals from the Hamburg ship. He is not offering them a dream. He is offering them a deal. You want to enter the United States? He barks. You want food, a roof, a wage? Then you will serve 5 years in the Army of Occupation. Your pay starts today. After your 5 years of honorable service, you will be granted full citizenship and a plot of land in the southern districts. You are the new pioneers. You will help us pacify the territories and build a new, loyal America. It's an offer few can refuse. The alternative is to be denied entry and sent back to the hopeless world they just fled. This is the unexpected, grim twist. America's famous melting pot has become a crucible for mercenaries. The teeming masses yearning to breathe free are funneled directly into the machinery of state violence. They are shipped to massive training camps in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, where they are taught how to handle a rifle, how to follow orders in English, and how to hate the Southern rebel. You follow one of these new recruits, a young Pole named Jan. His family was dispossessed by German expansionism in his homeland. He is tough, desperate, and sees this as his only chance. He is sent to Fort Sheridan, a sprawling training base. There he finds himself not in a diverse melting pot, but in a segregated enclave. The army, in a moment of brutal administrative logic, has found it's easier to organize these immigrant recruits by ethnicity. Jan is assigned to the 12th Federal Infantry, known informally as the Warsaw Legion. Its officers are Anglo-Americans, but the enlisted men are almost all Polish. The neighbouring regiment is the Italian Brigade. Another is composed of Irishmen who chose army life over deadly labour in the few northern factories. These ethnic regiments are then deployed to the south, where they form their own distinct enclaves within the larger US Army. Jan and the Warsaw Legion are assigned to garrison a particularly hostile county in northern Alabama. They are not just soldiers, they are colonists. The government encourages them to bring their families, establishing walled, protected villages around the forts. You see them trying to recreate a semblance of their old lives in this alien, hostile landscape. They build their own Catholic churches. They speak Polish in the barracks and mess halls. Their children attend schools run by the army, where they learn loyalty to the Union as a foreign, abstract concept, their only tangible connection to the state that employs their fathers. This creates a terrifying new ethical tension. The occupation is now, in essence, a colonial war fought by foreign mercenaries against a native population. You are with Jan on a patrol through the sullen, resentful Alabama countryside. The white Southern locals, the proscripts, hate the blue, uniformed soldiers with a primal fury. But their hatred for these new soldiers is even deeper, laced with a toxic xenophobia. They see them not just as invaders, but as foreign papal thralls, ignorant savages, sent to do the government's dirtiest work. Hessians, they call them, a bitter reference to the German mercenaries used by the British in the Revolution. Jan feels this hatred, and it hardens him. He has no shared language, no shared history, no shred of sympathy for these people who spit on him. He is not a Vermonter fighting a rebellious cousin. He is a Pole, hired to suppress an insurgency of strange, angry farmers. His loyalty is not to the abstract ideal of the Union, but to his sergeant, to the men of the Warsaw Legion, and to the government paycheck that feeds his family. When his patrol is ambushed, he fights back with a cold, professional ferocity, unburdened by any sense of shared nationality. The use of immigrant soldiers makes the occupation both more effective and infinitely more brutal. It severs the last remaining threads of kinship between the occupier and the occupied. It transforms a civil war into a nakedly imperial conflict. The immigrant, in search of the American dream, has been turned into a colonial policeman, a GI, Joe of a different sort, holding the line on a violent frontier, not in the West, but in the heart of the Old South. And as Jan stands guard on the wall of his fort, looking out at the dark, menacing woods of Alabama, he is not building a new, unified America. He is simply deepening the wounds, ensuring that the war between the two peoples will burn for another generation. The schism that divided America politically and culturally inevitably seeps into its soul, into the one thing that had once unified North and South, their shared Protestant faith. You are a student of religion, traveling America in the year 1910, trying to understand how the nation prays. You discover that God, like the nation itself, has been split in two. The national trauma of the assassination and the endless war that followed have mutated American Christianity into two hostile, irreconcilable faiths. You begin your journey in the North, in a stern, granite church in a mill town in Massachusetts. The service is sober, orderly, and profoundly intellectual. The minister, a man with the severe face of a Hamlin-era bureaucrat, does not speak of a loving, forgiving Jesus. His sermon is a thunderous explication of Romans 13. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. This is the core of Northern faith, the God of wrath and order. This new strain of American Puritanism views the federal state as a divine instrument. Its laws are God's laws, its enemies are God's enemies. The Lincoln assassination was not just a political murder. It was an act of blasphemy, a rebellion against God's chosen vessel for emancipation. The Southern insurgency is not just treason. It is a manifestation of sin, of chaotic, irrational passion that must be suppressed by the righteous, ordering hand of the state. Salvation is found not through personal, emotional experience, but through submission to divinely sanctioned authority and a life of disciplined, productive work in service to the national good. You see no passionate revivals here, no speaking in tongues, You see only a cold, hard, righteous faith that demands order and retribution. The cross on the wall feels less like a symbol of sacrifice and more like a symbol of power as severe and uncompromising as the federal eagle. This is a faith perfectly suited to the Republic of Scars. Then you travel south, into the backcountry of Tennessee. You slip past the federal patrols and find yourself in a hidden clearing in the woods. This is where the South comes to worship. There are no pews, no steeple, no pipe organ. There is only a rough-hewn wooden pulpit and a crowd of hundreds gathered under the moonlight, their faces etched with a suffering and a defiance that is almost ecstatic. The preacher is not a scholar from a divinity school. He is a charismatic farmer with fire in his eyes. And the God he speaks of is not the God of order. He speaks of the God of sorrows. This is the mystical, passionate, and deeply heterodox religion of the lost cause. It is a faith that blends folk traditions, spiritualism, and a deification of Confederate martyrs into a powerful new creed. The preacher doesn't read from Romans. He tells a story. He tells of General Stonewall Jackson, who before the Battle of Chancellorsville was seen praying in the woods, and whose spirit, they say, now rides with Forrest's men, shrouding them in a protective mist. He tells of Robert E. Lee's execution, framing it as a crucifixion, a sacrifice made to redeem the Southern people. Lee is not just a general. He is a Christ-like figure. The Vindicators and Grey Ghosts are not just insurgents. They are holy warriors, apostles in a sacred struggle. Your real-world anchor here is the potent myth of the lost cause itself. But in this world, it is not a nostalgic, literary movement. It is a living, breathing religion. It offers its followers what the Northern faith cannot: transcendence and meaning in the face of total worldly defeat. It tells them their suffering is not a punishment for the sin of slavery or rebellion, but a holy trial. They are God's chosen people, tested in the crucible of occupation. This is the deeply unsettling twist. The new Southern faith has become detached from traditional Christian orthodoxy. You witness a baptism in a cold mountain stream. After the formal rites, the newly baptized are touched with a relic piece of the uniform worn by a local man hanged by the Federals. The congregation sings hymns, but the melodies are old folk tunes, and the lyrics venerate Confederate heroes. It's a religion that is more about blood, soil, and ancestors than about the universal tenets of Christianity. It is a tribal faith for a broken tribe. And this reveals the ethical tension. You are talking to a woman after the service, a mother who has lost 2 sons to the insurgency. Her eyes shine with an unnerving, serene light. They ain't dead, she tells you, her voice trembling with conviction. They're with Lee's legions in the sky. They watch over us. One day, they will return with the Angel of the South and cleanse this land of the Yankee god of iron and machines. Her faith gives her immense comfort. It transforms her devastating loss into a noble sacrifice. It gives her hope in a hopeless situation. Who are you to question it? Who are you to tell her that her sons are not saints, but dead insurgents in a forgotten war? Who are you to say that her god of sorrows is a dangerous delusion that perpetuates the cycle of violence? Her faith is a balm for an open wound, but it is also a poison. It is this very belief system that will inspire her youngest son, a boy of 15 standing beside her, to pick up his father's rifle and join the next night-riding raid. The faith that soothes the older generation's pain is the same faith that condemns the next generation to repeat the same bloody sacrifice. The god of wrath in the north sanctifies the cold, impersonal violence of the state. The god of sorrows in the south sanctifies the passionate, personal violence of the insurgency. Both have turned their back on the Prince of Peace. you realize that the spiritual chasm is now deeper and more unbridgeable than the political one. The North and South do not just disagree on who should govern. They are praying to different gods. They are living in different cosmic realities. A war of armies can end. A war of economies can be settled. But a war of faiths, a war between two rival deities fighting for the soul of a continent, can never truly be over. The scene shifts. The air grows heavy with the metallic scent of impending doom. It is August 1914. In our world, this is the month that tipped the world into the abyss of the Great War. The pieces are all in place here as well. An archduke has been assassinated in Sarajevo. The complex web of alliances forged by the hegemonic German Reich and the nervous, resentful entente of Britain, a much weakened France, and a fragile Russia is tightening like a noose. The Kaiser, confident in his army and his navy, issues his infamous blank check to Austria, Hungary. The ultimatums fly. The mobilization orders are given. Europe, as a British statesman might have once said, is putting out its lights. But you are not in Europe. You are in Washington, D.C., in the office of the President of the United States. He is not the professorial Woodrow Wilson, a man who would one day dream of making the world safe for democracy. He is President Miles Poindexter, a stern-faced Republican from the state of Washington, a man who built his entire career on a platform of unyielding unionism and a promise to finally crush the Southern disease. His desk is not covered with maps of Belgium and Serbia. It is covered with casualty reports from Military District 6, formerly Arkansas, and logistical plans for deploying the new armoured Vindicator rail cars to the Mexican border to counter a rumoured build-up of exile, Confederate militias. When the British ambassador arrives to make a desperate plea for American support for munitions, for loans, for a show of solidarity against German aggression, President Poindexter gives him a cold, definitive answer. This is the moment where 50 years of altered history crystallizes into a single global consequence. Poindexter's reply, which will become a footnote in European history books but a cornerstone of American policy, is blunt. The United States is engaged in a war for its own survival, a war you Europeans have happily profited from by arming our enemies for 50 years. The quarrels of decadent empires an ocean away are not our concern. We will maintain a strict and absolute neutrality. We will not sell a bullet, nor loan a dollar, to any belligerent. This is not our fight. The real-world anchor here is American isolationism, but it is not the chosen, policy-driven isolationism of our 1920s and 30s. It is a forced, necessary isolationism born of weakness and preoccupation. America cannot intervene because it is too broken, too poor, too exhausted, and too consumed by its own internal demons to project power onto a global stage. The garrison economy has no surplus industrial capacity to become an arsenal of democracy. The Federal Army is a specialized anti-insurgency force, not an expeditionary army capable of fighting a modern industrial war. The nation's psyche, scarred and inward-looking, has no room for foreign crusades. The war begins, and it is a slaughter on a scale that dwarfs anything seen before. In the West, the German army, fighting a one-front war against a Franco-British force without the prospect of future American reinforcements, pushes deeper into France than they did in our history. The fighting on the Marne is catastrophic, but it leads not to a stalemate, but to a slow, grinding German advance. Paris does not fall, but it is under siege for 3 brutal years. In the east, Germany throws its full weight against a poorly equipped and demoralized Russian army, leading to a total collapse of the Tsarist front by 1916. This is the unexpected, ghastly twist. Without American intervention, the War of the Empires becomes a true war of attrition that neither side can decisively win. The British, protected by their navy and their vast colonial resources, cannot be invaded. The Germans, masters of the continent and fed by the resources of a defeated Russia, cannot be starved out. There is no fresh wave of 2 million American doughboys to tip the balance in 1917. There are no massive infusions of American credit to keep the Entente war machine running. There is only a hopeless, bloody equilibrium. The war lasts until the autumn of 1919. It does not end with a surrender in a railway car or a treaty at Versailles. It simply sputters out from sheer, absolute exhaustion. Millions lie dead. Entire regions of France, Belgium, Poland, and Russia are uninhabitable moonscapes. The economies of Britain and Germany are shattered. Their populations are on the brink of starvation and revolution. Finally, through the mediation of the Pope, the belligerents agree to an armistice. A peace of exhaustion is signed in neutral Geneva. The treaty redraws no major borders. It imposes no war guilt. It is simply a formal acknowledgement that the killing must stop. It is a truce, not a victory. All the belligerents return to their corners, battered, broken, and filled with a burning, unquenched resentment. Germany remains the dominant power on the continent, but it is a wounded giant. Britain holds its empire, but it is bankrupt. France is a ruin. A new, radical Bolshevik government, which seized power in Russia during the collapse, consolidates its hold, preaching world revolution to a continent of disillusioned and angry people. The ethical tension of this outcome is immense. On one hand, millions of American lives were spared. The United States did not sacrifice a generation in the mud of Flanders. It remained safe, aloof, consumed by its own familiar struggles. But this non-involvement, this saving of American lives, has allowed Europe to commit suicide. By remaining neutral, America allowed the war to become so devastating, so inconclusive, that it solved nothing. It didn't make the world safe for democracy. It didn't end the age of empires. It simply bankrupted the empires and left them all thirsting for a second, final round. Sitting in his quiet office in Washington, President Poindexter congratulates himself on his foresight, on keeping America out of Europe's self-made hell. He sees it as a vindication of a half-century of policy. But he is blind to the larger truth. The Great War, fought to a bitter, bloody stalemate, has created a world far more dangerous than the one that preceded it. The stage is not set for a roaring 20s, but for a smouldering 30s. The ideologies of communism, of ultranationalism, and of revanchism now have a fertile field of broken nations in which to grow. America, by choosing to remain a quiet, fractured continent lost to its own ghosts, has abandoned the world to its own. And the coming darkness will be deeper and more terrible than anyone can imagine. You arrive in the middle of the 20th century, the year 1950. The world is not one defined by the titanic struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. The American century never dawned. You are a journalist, perhaps for a Swiss newspaper, on a tour of the quiet continent, the land that time forgot, the North American republics. That is the official term, but everyone knows it is a lie. There is no single republic. You begin in the North, in what is still called the United States of America. You find a country that is stable, stagnant, and sad. The capital, Washington, D.C., is a city of grey, imposing monuments to a past victory that feels increasingly hollow. The Radical Republican Party, now just called the Unionist Party, still rules. The presidency is a lifetime appointment, passed from one aging party stalwart to the next. The garrison economy, deprived of the spark of a world war, has chugged along, producing its predictable quotas of uniforms, canned goods, and replacement parts for the occupation forces. The culture is one of conformity, and the arts are dominated by state-sponsored works that celebrate duty and order. The North is safe, it is peaceful, and it is suffocatingly dull. The 25-star flag flutters over a nation that is essentially a giant, well-managed nursing home, its gaze forever fixed on the internal wound that will not heal. Then you take one of the armored trains south. The landscape changes. It is poorer, more volatile, and yet strangely more alive. This is the Confederate Republic of America, a nation that does not officially exist on any map, but lives fiercely in the hearts of its people. Decades of low-grade insurgency eventually forced a practical compromise. The US Army withdrew to heavily fortified zones around key cities and rail lines, ceding the vast, ungovernable countryside to local Redeemer governments. This is the land of the God of Sorrows, a place of passionate politics, blood feuds, and an almost fanatical devotion to the lost cause. It is economically impoverished, relying on agriculture and smuggling with the Mexican Empire, but it is culturally vibrant, producing a torrent of fiery poetry, tragic ballads, and a dark, brooding literature that is studied with fascination in Europe. You travel to the Great Plains. The Iron Confederacy of the Lakota and Cheyenne remains a sovereign power. They never became wards of the state. They have become a hard, pragmatic nation. The great buffalo herds are gone now, hunted to near extinction by the mid-century to feed the Confederacy's growing population, but they have adapted. They control the vast mineral resources within their territory, selling ore and oil to British and German firms through trade routes in Canada and Mexico. Their society is a unique hybrid of traditional nomadic life and modern resource extraction economics. Their light cavalry, once armed with Winchesters, now ride in armoured cars purchased from German arms manufacturers, patrolling their borders against encroachments from both the north and the south. Finally, you visit Mexico City, the capital of the Mexican Empire. It is the glittering metropolis of the continent, the true centre of power and culture in the Western Hemisphere. The Habsburg dynasty, solidified by another 80 years of rule, presides over a stable, prosperous, and deeply stratified society. Its alliance with the German Reich makes it a major player on the world stage. It is a cosmopolitan beacon of art, science, and autocratic stability, looking upon its fractured northern neighbours with a mixture of amusement and disdain. This is the shocking final landscape. North America is not a unified continent dominated by a single superpower. It is a balkanized patchwork of rival states, each with its own culture, its own allies, its own destiny. It is quiet. There is no Cold War here, no nuclear arms race, no space race. There is no American pop culture influencing the globe. The continent is a geopolitical backwater, a regional problem for the great powers of Europe to manage. Its internal squabbles are of no more concern to Berlin or London than a tribal conflict in Africa. This is the unexpected, profound outcome. Lincoln's death didn't just break the Union. It silenced a continent. The ultimate ethical tension lies in the final balance sheet of this alternate history. Was it better? This question hangs over you as your tour concludes. In this world, the horrors of the Trail of Tears were not repeated on a massive scale. A Native American nation thrives with sovereignty. The systematic annihilation of 60 million bison was averted for decades. The United States did not send a generation of its young men to die in the meat grinder of the Great War, and perhaps a second global conflict, one far worse, was averted because the world was not divided into two neat, ideologically opposed camps. These are not insignificant gains, but at what cost? The promise of a multiracial democracy, however flawed, was stillborn. The ideal of a nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, died on that dusty road in August 1864. In its place rose a collection of stagnant, ethnically defined states, a rigid, militaristic north, a resentful, backward-looking south, a tribal plains confederacy, and a glittering autocracy in Mexico. The technological and social dynamism that characterized our 20th century America is absent. The continent is a museum of its own 19th century hatreds, a place where history never moved on. It purchased peace at the price of its own future. The world is poorer for its absence, poorer in innovation, in economic energy, and in the power of its democratic ideal, which, having failed so spectacularly in its home country, is now dismissed as a dangerous fantasy. The silent continent is a testament to a terrible trade-off. It escaped some of our timeline's most horrific chapters, but in doing so, it missed its chance at greatness, at progress, at becoming something more than the sum of its bitter past. It is a world without Americas as we know them, a world haunted by the ghost of a tall, sad-eyed man who might have led it down a different path of reconciliation that, for all its pain and struggle, might have led to a better, if more dangerous, tomorrow. So, we step back out of the quiet continent and into our own noisy, chaotic world. What do we see? We see that history is not a morality play. It is a series of brutal trade-offs. The world without Lincoln's wisdom is not a simple hellscape. It is a place where some historical injustices were avoided, only to be replaced by new, more insidious ones. The preservation of the Great Plains ecosystem came at the cost of democratic progress. The avoidance of the world wars came at the cost of global liberty, leaving the world stage to a cohort of authoritarian empires. The economic empowerment of freedmen was bought with the currency of perpetual war and dependence on a garrison state. There is no better timeline. There are only different ones, each with its own ledger of profits and losses. Our history is one of astonishing progress yoked to unimaginable violence. Theirs is a history of arrested development and quiet sorrow. We reached for the stars and sometimes fell into the abyss. They never dared to look up. This journey reminds us that the paths not taken still haunt the lands we walk. Every monument to a unified nation, every shared dream, is built upon a foundation of contingent events that could have gone another way. The grace of a merciful peace is not a given, it is a choice, and a fragile one. The America that emerged from the Civil War was not inevitable. It was the product of a handful of key decisions, of a few crucial words of forgiveness spoken when words of vengeance were easier. By imagining their absence, we can better feel their weight.